The wreckage told the story better than any official report ever could. 20 Japanese aircraft scattered across the waters around Bougainville on September 16, 1943. Not a single F-4U Corsair lost to enemy action. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington banked his bent-wing fighter toward home. Behind him, smoke columns marked where the myth of Japanese air superiority had finally died. The man leading this mission broke every rule in the fighter pilot handbook. At 31, Boyington was ancient by combat standards. He'd already served with the Flying Tigers in China, shot down 6 Japanese planes there before returning home in 1942. Military wisdom said he was too old, too independent, too experienced to lead young Marines. But Boyington was exactly what the Corsair squadrons needed. An aggressive leader who understood how to use superior technology. He'd taken command of VMF 214 in August 1943. The Black Sheep Squadron, as they called themselves. In 2 weeks, they'd already destroyed 23 enemy aircraft. Today's mission was simple in concept, devastating in execution. Fly over the Japanese airfield in plain sight. Wait for them to scramble their fighters. Then destroy them in aerial combat. This fighter sweep tactic had become the Corsairs' signature move. Unlike earlier defensive missions, the F-4U let American pilots choose when and where to fight. The Japanese response was swift and massive. 60 enemy aircraft climbed toward Boyington's 24 Corsairs. The largest single formation most American pilots had ever faced. For Japanese pilots scrambling from Kahili Airfield, the sight must have triggered mixed emotions. By September 1943, the bent-wing fighter was no longer unknown. Intelligence reports detailed its capabilities. Veteran pilots had learned to approach it with extreme caution. But 60 against 24 seemed like good odds. Let's go back to see how this deadly weapon came to dominate Pacific skies. February 14, 1943, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Marine Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh climbed into his F-4U cockpit. The morning sun gleamed off those distinctive bent wings. Around him, other Marines prepared for what would become the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. None knew this day would mark a turning point. The day Japanese pilots would stop laughing at the strange American fighter. Just months earlier, experienced Zero pilots had looked at the first Corsairs with amusement. The bent-wing fighter appeared awkward, almost experimental. Its long nose stretched far ahead of the cockpit. Compared to their sleek Mitsubishi A6M0, the F-4U seemed built by committee. Not crafted by engineers who understood flight. But appearances, as the Japanese would learn, could be devastatingly deceptive. The story began in 1938 in Navy Bureau of Aeronautics offices. The Navy wanted something that seemed impossible. A single-engine fighter exceeding 400 miles per hour. Stalling speed below 70 miles per hour. Range of 1,000 miles. It needed to carry 4 guns plus bombs. Fly fast, fly far, land on carriers, and inflict devastating damage. Chance Vought Corporation's chief engineer Rex Beisel made a bold decision. Instead of compromising on performance, he'd build the fighter around the largest, most powerful engine available. The massive Pratt and Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine. This monster generated over 2,000 horsepower. More than many bombers of the era. But that created an immediate problem. Such enormous power required an equally massive propeller. The Hamilton Standard 3-blade propeller measured 13 feet 4 inches in diameter. Larger than many fighters were tall. How do you mount such a huge propeller without making the landing gear impossibly long? Beisel's solution was elegant and innovative. Instead of straight wings high on the fuselage, he designed inverted gull wings. The wings angled sharply downward. then bent back up toward the tips. This gave the propeller adequate ground clearance while keeping landing gear short and strong. The result looked like nothing else in the sky. Viewed head-on, the F-4U's bent wings gave it an almost bat-like silhouette. Some pilots joked it looked like someone tried to fold an airplane's wings while it was flying. On May 29, 1940, test pilot Lyman Bullard climbed into the prototype for its maiden flight. What happened next sent shockwaves through aviation circles. The Corsair didn't just fly, it shattered records. In level flight, it became the first single-engine American fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour. It reached 405 miles per hour between Stratford and Hartford, Connecticut. In dive tests, pilots pushed it to 550 miles per hour before structural stress forced them to pull back. The Navy was sold. On June 30, 1941, they awarded Vought a contract for 584 F-4U-1 fighters. But, as production Corsairs rolled off the line in 1942, problems emerged. The same long nose that housed the powerful engine created serious visibility issues. When sitting nose-high for carrier landings, pilots literally couldn't see the flight deck. Even worse, the Corsair exhibited dangerous landing characteristics. It tended to stall unpredictably, with one wing dropping suddenly. The powerful engine created tremendous torque that could flip inexperienced pilots into unrecoverable spins. Early test pilots nicknamed it the Ensign Eliminator and the Bent Wing Widowmaker. The Navy made a decision that seemed practical but proved fortunate. Rather than delay carrier operations, they'd give Corsairs to the Marine Corps for land-based operations. They adopted the more docile Grumman F-6F Hellcat for carriers. This decision would prove one of the most fortunate accidents in military aviation history. By early 1943, Marine fighting squadrons still flew the outclassed Grumman F-4F Wildcat, a stubby fighter that had given good service early in the war, but it was increasingly overmatched by newer Japanese aircraft. The Marines desperately needed something capable of intercepting high-altitude bombers, something that could go toe-to-toe with the legendary Zero. On February 12, 1943, 12 F-4U-1s from VMF 124 landed at Henderson Field. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The Solomons campaign was entering its most critical phase. Japanese and American forces were locked in brutal combat for control of the island chain. In the air, both sides threw everything into the fight for aerial superiority. Marine pilots gathering around the new Corsairs were initially skeptical. The aircraft looked alien compared to their familiar Wildcats. The cockpit sat far back on the fuselage. The massive engine took up so much space that fuel had to be stored ahead of the cockpit. Everything seemed oversized and overpowered. But when Marines fired up those Pratt & Whitney engines for the first time, skepticism gave way to excitement. The sound was unlike anything they'd experienced. A deep, rumbling roar that spoke of barely contained power. When they pushed the throttle forward for takeoff, the Corsair leaped into the air with acceleration that amazed Wildcat pilots. 2 days later, on February 14th, the Marines got their first taste of combat. The mission was escorting B-24 Liberator bombers against the Japanese airfield at Kahili. As the formation approached the target, Japanese Zeros scrambled to intercept. This would be the first major test of the F-4U in aerial combat. The Japanese pilots rising to meet them were no rookies. These were veteran aviators who'd been fighting since the war's earliest days. They'd faced every American fighter type. They'd developed tactics to exploit each aircraft's weaknesses. Against slow-turning Wildcats, they used superior maneuverability to force dogfights at low speeds and altitudes, where Japanese aircraft's lightweight construction and excellent control response gave decisive advantages. As Zeros closed with the American formation, Their pilots expected another familiar dance. Use superior climb rate to gain altitude advantage. Dive down to break up the bomber formation. Engage escort fighters in turning combat, where agility would prove decisive. But as the first Zeros dove toward the formation, Corsair pilots did something unexpected. Instead of turning to meet the attack, they pushed throttles forward and accelerated away from the Japanese fighters. Zeros committed to their diving attacks found themselves unable to close the distance. The bent-wing fighters simply outran them. Then, with speed advantage established, the Corsairs turned back toward the Japanese formation. What happened next would be repeated thousands of times over the remaining war years. The F-4Us used superior speed and power to dictate engagement terms, attacking when and where they chose, denying the enemy the slow-speed turning fights where Zeros excelled. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh found himself face-to-face with an experienced Zero pilot. The Japanese fighter turned tightly, trying to bring guns to bear. But Walsh had been briefed on new tactics developed specifically for the F-4U. Instead of trying to turn with the enemy, he used speed advantage to extend away from combat, then climbed above his opponent before diving back down for another attack. The 650 caliber machine guns in the Corsairs' wings each carried between 375 and 400 rounds. When all six fired together, they created a devastating wall of lead that could tear apart even well-armored aircraft. The Japanese Zero, built for speed and agility rather than survivability, was particularly vulnerable to this firepower. As Walsh's guns found their mark, the Zero's lightweight construction became a liability. The 50 caliber rounds, each nearly half an inch in diameter and traveling over 2,700 feet per second, punched through thin aluminum skin like paper. Fuel tanks erupted into flames. Control cables snapped. Structural members shattered under heavy bullet impact. The engagement lasted only seconds, but the outcome was decisive. The Zero spiraled earthward, trailing smoke and flame. Walsh had scored his first victory in the new fighter. More importantly, he demonstrated the tactics that would make the Corsair the most successful American fighter of the Pacific War. By engagement's end, Marines had lost 2 Corsairs. But they'd learned invaluable lessons about fighting effectively in their new aircraft. The F-4U's advantages were clear. It was faster than anything the Japanese had, could climb better than the Zero at medium and high altitudes, could outdive any enemy fighter. Its rugged construction meant it could absorb battle damage that would destroy a Zero and still bring its pilot home. But perhaps most importantly, the Corsair's 650 caliber machine guns gave it decisive firepower advantage. Where the Zero relied on a mix of machine guns and slower-firing cannons, the F-4U could put nearly 30 pounds of bullets into the air every second. The 2,300 rounds carried by each Corsair provided just under 30 seconds of continuous fire, more than enough to destroy multiple enemy aircraft in a single engagement. Word of Corsair capabilities spread quickly through both forces. For Americans, it represented the beginning of a new phase, one where they'd no longer fight defensive battles against superior enemy aircraft. For the Japanese, the F-4U's appearance marked the beginning of the end of their aerial dominance. Japanese intelligence reports from early 1943 painted growing concern about the new American fighter. Pilots who survived encounters reported that bent-wing fighters were faster than anything they'd faced, more heavily armed than Wildcats, seemingly impervious to battle damage that would destroy their lighter aircraft, but old habits die hard. Many Japanese pilots initially refused to believe Americans had finally produced a fighter superior to their beloved Zero. The Mitsubishi A-6M had been undisputed king of Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor. Its incredible range excellent maneuverability, and proven combat record made it the symbol of Japanese aerial power. Surely this strange American aircraft with awkward appearance couldn't seriously challenge Zero supremacy. This confidence would prove not just misplaced, but catastrophically expensive. As more Corsair squadrons entered combat in spring 1943, the balance of power began shifting dramatically. Marine pilots, freed from defensive mindset imposed by flying inferior aircraft, began developing aggressive tactics that exploited every F-4U advantage. Lieutenant Walsh, having tasted victory in his first Corsair mission, quickly became a leading proponent of these new tactics. Rather than waiting for enemy attacks, Corsair pilots began seeking out Japanese formations. They used superior speed to position themselves for devastating high-speed attacks. They'd climb above enemy formations, dive down at speeds approaching 400 miles per hour, fire 50-caliber guns into tightly packed Japanese aircraft, then extend away before the enemy could react. These tactics, later called boom and zoom attacks, played to every F-4U strength while minimizing its few weaknesses. Excellent high-altitude performance meant it could often climb above Japanese formations. Outstanding dive performance allowed devastating high-speed attacks. Superior firepower meant even brief firing opportunities could prove decisive. Rugged construction provided safety margins that allowed risks that would be suicidal in earlier American fighters. By April 1943, just 2 months after first Corsairs arrived, effects were becoming clear. On April 7th, radar picked up a large Japanese formation headed toward the Russell Islands. The American response was swift and overwhelming. 76 fighters rose to meet the threat. Army P-38s and P-39s alongside Marine F-4Fs and the new F-4Us. The battle became one of the largest air engagements of the Solomons campaign. When smoke cleared, 39 Japanese aircraft had been shot down. American losses were minimal. Corsair pilots were credited with a significant portion of victories. This demonstrated their aircraft wasn't just capable of holding its own against the Zero. It was actively superior in most combat situations. But real proof came from individual pilot achievements. In May 1943, Lieutenant Walsh achieved ace status when he shot down 3 Zeros in a single engagement, bringing his total to 6 victories. The ease with which he'd achieved these kills proved the previously feared Zero was no longer superior to American naval fighters when flown with proper tactics. The psychological impact extended far beyond tactical significance. For nearly 2 years, American pilots had fought knowing their aircraft were inferior. They'd relied on courage, teamwork, and superior tactics to overcome technological disadvantages. The Corsairs' arrival marked the first time since Pearl Harbor that American pilots could climb into cockpits, knowing they flew the better machine. This confidence showed in combat results. By August 1943, Walsh had become a double ace with 10 confirmed victories. Other Corsair pilots achieved similar success. The cumulative effect was devastating for Japanese air power in the Solomons. Experienced enemy pilots, the backbone of Japanese naval aviation, were being shot down faster than they could be replaced. Back to that September morning over Bougainville. Boyington watched 60 enemy fighters climb toward his formation. He made a calculated decision that would define the engagement. Instead of maintaining altitude and forcing Japanese to climb to him, he ordered Corsairs to descend and meet the enemy halfway. This violated standard doctrine, but reflected growing American confidence in their aircraft's capabilities. As formations closed, Corsairs used speed advantage to control the engagement. Rather than becoming entangled in a massive dogfight where numbers might favor Japanese, F-4Us broke into smaller elements. They could coordinate attacks while maintaining flexibility to disengage when necessary. The sound was unlike anything heard before in the Pacific War. 60 aircraft at maximum power created thunderous roar audible for miles. Machine gun and cannon chatter mixed with screaming aircraft in high-speed dives. For Marines circling above Bougainville, it was the sound of American air power finally unleashed without constraint. Lieutenant Robert McClurg, flying as Boyington's wingman, later described the engagement as controlled chaos. The skies seemed filled with aircraft turning, diving, climbing in patterns that changed every second. But within apparent confusion, Corsair superiority began to tell. Japanese pilots found themselves unable to keep up with rapid acceleration and climb rate of F-4Us. American pilots could position themselves for killing shots with relative ease. The 650 caliber machine guns proved devastatingly effective against lightly built Japanese fighters. Each gun fired at approximately 800 rounds per minute. When all six synchronized, they put nearly 30 pounds of bullets into the air every second. The impact on fragile Zero fighters was catastrophic. Marine Sergeant James Sweat found himself alone against 3 Zeros trying to box him in. In earlier aircraft, such a situation would be desperate, possibly fatal. But the F-4U's performance gave Sweat options previous American fighters lacked. He pushed his throttle forward, using superior acceleration to break free of the trap, then climbed rapidly above his pursuers. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine pulled the Corsair upward at a rate that left Japanese pilots struggling to follow. At altitude, Sweat had advantage of position and energy. He rolled inverted and dove back toward the 3 Zeros, speed building to over 400 miles per hour as he plunged earthward. The attack lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Sweat's 6 machine guns, loaded with armor-piercing and incendiary rounds, converged on the lead Zero at less than 200 yards range. The Japanese fighter virtually disintegrated under heavy bullet impact. Its pilot, likely killed instantly, had no chance to react as his aircraft broke apart around him. Before the other Zeros could respond, Sweat had extended past them, using diving speed to open range while positioning for another attack. This hit-and-run tactic, perfected by Corsair pilots over months of combat, allowed American fighters to engage superior numbers without becoming trapped in disadvantageous situations. Across the battle space, similar scenes played out. Individual Corsair pilots used aircraft superiority to engage and destroy enemy fighters. The Japanese formation began coming apart under sustained assault. Aircraft fell from the sky trailing smoke and flame, their pilots either dead at controls or struggling with crippled machines that could no longer maneuver effectively. The technological gap between the two aircraft types became increasingly apparent. Where damaged Corsairs could absorb tremendous battle damage and continue fighting, even minor hits on Zeros often proved catastrophic. Japanese emphasis on lightweight construction, which had given their fighters superior range and maneuverability early in the war, now became a liability their pilots paid for with their lives. Captain Donald Aldrich, leading a 4-plane section, encountered 6 Zeros attempting to attack a damaged American bomber struggling to reach friendly territory. Rather than diving immediately into the engagement, Aldrich positioned his section above and behind the Japanese formation, using the sun to mask their approach. When the attack came, it was devastatingly effective. 4 Corsairs, diving at high speed, with sun at their backs, opened fire simultaneously on unsuspecting Japanese fighters. In 10 seconds, 3 Zeros were destroyed. A 4th so badly damaged, its pilot broke off the bomber attack. The remaining 2 Japanese pilots attempted to escape by diving toward the ocean surface. They hoped Corsair's superior high-altitude performance would be less decisive at low level. But F-4U's excellent dive characteristics meant it could follow enemy aircraft even into their preferred low-altitude domain. Both Zeros were shot down before reaching the relative safety of their home airfield. As the battle raged on, the cumulative effect of superior American technology and tactics became undeniable. What had begun as 60 versus 24 was rapidly becoming a rout. Japanese aircraft fell from the sky faster than their comrades could track. American losses remained minimal. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese pilots was profound. Many would later report the engagement convinced them the air war was lost. By the time last shots were fired, 20 Japanese aircraft lay scattered across waters around Bougainville. Not a single Corsair lost to enemy action, though several bore battle damage testifying to the engagement's intensity. For the Black Sheep Squadron, it represented their most successful mission to date. For Japanese air power in the Solomons, it marked the beginning of the end. Major Boyington, his guns empty and fuel running low, led his formation home to Vella La Vella. Behind them, smoke from burning aircraft marked the site of what would be remembered as one of the most one-sided air battles of the Pacific War. The Japanese would continue to fight, but their ability to contest American air superiority had been broken over Bougainville Sound. The impact extended far beyond immediate tactical results. Each successful Corsair mission increased American confidence while eroding Japanese morale. Veteran enemy pilots were being killed at rates that made replacement impossible. Training programs that once produced skilled aviators were now rushed affairs. They sent barely competent pilots into combat against increasingly experienced American opponents flying superior aircraft. The technological gap continued widening as American industry produced improved Corsair versions, while Japanese aircraft development stagnated under wartime resource shortages. The F-4U 1D variant, introduced in April 1944, featured an even more powerful engine with water injection. Output increased to over 2,400 horsepower. Speed increased to 425 miles per hour. Already impressive climb rate improved further. More importantly, the new variant incorporated lessons learned from months of combat operations. Visibility was improved, handling characteristics refined, weapon systems optimized for maximum effectiveness. Where early Corsairs had been powerful but difficult to fly, later variants were both more capable and more forgiving of pilot error. The psychological warfare aspect of the F-4U's reputation became almost as important as actual combat effectiveness. Japanese pilots, hearing stories of destruction wrought by bent-wing fighters, began approaching combat with defensive mindset. This often proved self-fulfilling. Aggressive tactics that had served Japanese aviation well early in the war gave way to cautious approaches that played into American strengths. By early 1944, the transformation was complete. The Corsair had evolved from a promising but problematic fighter into the Pacific War's dominant aircraft. Its kill ratio against Japanese opponents approached 12-1 in some theaters, a level of superiority unprecedented in aerial warfare. More than 2,000 enemy aircraft would fall to Corsair guns before war's end. Fewer than 200 F-4Us were lost to enemy action. The human cost of this technological superiority was profound. Japanese pilot training programs, once the world's envy, could no longer produce aviators capable of matching American skill and equipment. Experienced enemy pilots who'd learned their trade in 1941 and 1942 campaigns were being killed faster than they could pass knowledge to new generations. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Spears, commanding Marine Aircraft Group 14, summarized the transformation in a headquarters report. The F-4U's arrival has fundamentally altered air combat character in this theater. Where our pilots once fought defensively, hoping to survive encounters with superior enemy aircraft, They now seek out combat. They have confidence that their equipment gives them decisive advantages. The psychological impact of this change cannot be overstated. Perhaps the most telling evidence came from Japanese sources. Captured documents from late 1943 and early 1944 revealed enemy commanders were increasingly reluctant to commit remaining experienced pilots against American formations known to include F-4Us. The aircraft, once dismissed as an awkward experiment, had become so feared its mere presence could alter Japanese tactical planning. The strategic implications of American air superiority, built on Corsair dominance, rippled throughout the Pacific War. Japanese plans that once assumed at least local air superiority now had to account for American air power that could strike anywhere, any time. Supply lines became vulnerable, troop movements hazardous, defensive positions exposed to constant attack from aircraft Japanese fighters could no longer effectively intercept. As 1944 dawned, the Pacific Air War had been fundamentally transformed. The Japanese, who began the conflict with arguably the world's most advanced naval aviation forces, found themselves flying obsolescent aircraft. Inadequately trained pilots faced an enemy possessing both technological and numerical superiority. The Corsair, more than any other single factor, had made this transformation possible. The bent-wing fighter Japanese pilots once viewed with amusement had become the instrument of their aerial defeat. Its 50-caliber machine guns, thundering engine, and distinctive silhouette had become symbols of American technological and industrial might. In increasingly skilled Marine and Navy pilot hands, it represented a weapon system so effective it would continue dominating Pacific skies until war's end. The laughter of those early Japanese pilots, confident in zero superiority and dismissive of American engineering, had been silenced forever. In skies above islands whose names would be forever associated with American air power, Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Rabaul, and dozens of others, where the distinctive whistle of air through Corsair engine intakes had become the sound of approaching victory. In the end, the F-4U Corsair proved that in warfare, as in engineering, appearances could indeed be deceiving. The ungainly fighter with bent wings and oversized engine had become one of history's most successful combat aircraft. Its legacy, written in enemy fighter wreckage, scattered across thousands of square miles of Pacific Ocean. The Japanese pilots, who initially laughed at its unusual configuration, would never have the chance to laugh again.